Hey, everybody. Josh Sheridan here with the Barely Legal Podcast.
They demand my alter ego, but I won't go.
On today's show, we have my mentor in the world of music, Gabe Echazabal. God, I'm getting better at it. That's the most stressful part of my week is pronouncing your last name. You're a third timer. You're just setting and breaking every record with this podcast.
I'm beyond honored.
Are you? It's yeah. I mean, everybody's talking about it. Your Q rating is just through the roof. I mean, there's tens of 20 of people that are listening to the show, but it's personally very enjoyable for me. So basically the way that this works is Gabe holds kind of a special position here where I come up with a musical topic for Gabe, and I send him down a rabbit hole of I think he does this anyway, but maybe I give him some focus. So, before it was, let's pick a topic, and we talked about the New York scene in the late 60s and 70s and Max's Kansas City and CBGB and really enjoyed that show. So every now and again, I come up with an idea and I message Gabe and said, how about we do one on this? And he's always game. So today is, we didn't originally pick a number. I'm going to set it as a premise of each of our top 10 frontmen. But I think Gabe probably came up with about 50. So at the end, we're going to circle back around. His are like cross-referenced by probably geography, music type, timeline and alphabetized or something. I don't know. He really kind of gilds the lily in that regard, but I appreciate him for that. So, without further ado, by now people should know who you are. So I'm going to say, let's get into it.
Thank you.
Top frontmen. So before I ask you your first one, what was your thought process? Like, how did you approach this project?
Well, I thought about it long and hard, and you're right. This is what I do at home anyway.
Yeah. Regardless
of whether, I was happy enough to, honored enough for you to have me on. But this is the type of stuff I do anyway. But this is really hard because there's so many different roads we could travel down. So I made myself some notes just to kind of keep myself in focus of what I wanted to achieve. And a couple things, and I'll be quick and then I'll jump into it. A couple things that I wanted to touch on was I really thought about what makes a frontman great. What is that essence that makes them great? So a couple of things that came to mind were things like charisma, style, originality, individuality, swagger. That's a big part of it. Attentiveness to the audience, coyness. You have to have kind of that give and take, I think. The ability to overpower and overshadow your fellow bandmates, but the class and unwillingness to do so.
Right.
It's easy for them to be in the spotlight. They are in the spotlight anyway. But to me, a great frontman is one who shares that stage with everyone. I mean, sometimes some great frontmen, it's hard to take your eyes off of them. But at the same time, a great frontman is going to make you want to pay attention to the rest of the guys in the band or the women in the band. Frontman should be his own island or entity while still making it very obvious that he's very much a part of a greater group.
That leads me to one topic that I want to get into with you before, and if you've got more to say, please. But one thing that I had a problem with is bands where there were effectively two frontmen.
Yeah.
And that's a big hill to get over and deciding like, who's the front man of the Beatles, right?
Exactly.
Who's the front man of Led Zeppelin? Who's the front man of the Rolling Stones? There's these Lennon, McCartney, Plant, Page, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, these situations where it's like you could make a strong argument that one or the other of them were a front man.
But I think what's great about those, and you're absolutely right. I think what's great about those pairings is that it leads each one of those guys to step it up just a little more.
A friendly and sometimes not so friendly competition between the people.
Which makes for very good onstage drama. A great frontman to me is sharp when it comes to timing, to presentation, to intuition, things like that. Now, what I did too, this was hard for me because there are people who are better known as kind of solo performers. They're better known as artists among themselves. they're great frontmen, but in the true sense of what I think we're going to talk about, I didn't necessarily go with guys that are known for their own contributions versus being part of a band. So
I agree with you on that point. And for that reason, Elvis Costello does not find his way on my list. Bob Dylan does not find his way on my list. Tom Petty does not find his way on my list. These are people that theoretically or technically are part of bands, and they are the front men, but they're kind of, I don't want to say the whole show because that's disrespectful to a bunch of amazing musicians who play along with them. But it's hard for me to think of Tom Petty as a front man, Bob Dylan as they're more of a singular entity.
Sure. So. And I went with, to me, the greatest of all time, Little Richard. That's not really where I was going with this. I was going for part of.
And he got a lot of love in our last interview, I think.
God.
So.
He's just so huge. People like Chuck Berry, Bruce Springsteen, Otis Redding, James Brown, arguably the greatest frontman, if you ask anybody. Those people I kind of left out because I didn't think that really.
I did too.
They're fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's what you were looking for, and not the direction I went in. So
we're on the same frequency there.
Okay.
So I'm with you.
Good.
All right. So do you want to volley, or how do you want to do it?
Sure.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because I think you put a lot more thought and effort just looking at your notes from me than I did. So if you kind of had a way that you wanted to tackle it, we can do it your way, or we can volley back and forth.
I just thought it was interesting to kind of break it down by not so much by decade or by genre, but maybe a combination of both. So
how many subcategories do you have?
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I got about 4 or 5, and then I have.
Well, why don't we do a category, and then if one of mine kind of falls within that category, then I'll talk on it, and then we'll go to your next category. And go from there. I'm interested to see how many of mine you cover. So
that sounds good.
Go ahead with your first category.
And of course, keep in mind I left out about 1,000 other people that I could have included.
Oh well, for sure. And then the other thing is too, like, we could go through Motown versus rock versus this, that, and the other. I mean, so by no means, if I'm missing somebody, am I trying to denigrate a musical taste.
Not at all.
I basically just went off of what I know and love.
Sure.
And so that's where a lot of my guys, and then probably my guys are a lot more contemporary than some of your guys, just because, I'm just such a young, Yeah,
I have some old folks on here.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, these are the guys that obviously that spoke the loudest to me, that made the most sense to me in my upbringing. So that's kind of where I went with these selections.
So what's category? Give me the introduction to category number 1.
I just started with, just because it's the first thing I thought of was punk rock. And I have Johnny Rotten / Lydon and Joe Strummer.
So Joe Strummer, thank you for saying that, because that brings me into another situation with Joe Strummer and Mick Jones, because again, they very much, that dynamic is a kind of a dual front to the band. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And very popular, probably unpopular opinion here. Mick Jones is my favorite part of the Clash. The Clash is probably my favorite band. Mick Jones to me is integral. I mean, no slight on Strummer, but Mick Jones to me was just, he formed the band. He was the spirit of the band for me. Strummer, undeniable frontman. So I did go with Strummer, but you're right. Either one of them could have been.
Who were the other two?
I went with Johnny Rotten, or later known as Lydon, because I did include Public Image Limited. But it was just.
So those are the British manifestation of punk rock. Okay, so that's interesting, because there's a whole other punk rock conversation that you can have.
True.
Okay, I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but so what is it about these people that you love, and what is it that spoke to you about these people?
Well, the thing about Johnny Rotten,
just attitude,
just irreverent,
and fuck you to the like. I've always loved frontmen who are at war with the fans and at war with the crowd, like spitting on each other and taunting and just,
Exactly.
Yeah.
One thing that I've always found really fascinating, not just in rock and roll, but in life is, the people who attract such polar opposite reactions.
Yeah.
To me is just fascinating.
Yeah.
Like somebody like Johnny Rotten, for example, there was as many people who hated him as there were people who followed him and thought he was the greatest thing. That to me is just such an interesting, just.
He's an anti-hero.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So, things like we said, like snotty, irreverent. He was vulgar for all intents and purposes. To me, all the things that rock and roll should be.
Yeah.
That to me is what it was built on. He was vilified in the press and to the unwitting public. I mean, there was all sorts of rumors. I remember when I was a kid reading my older sister's Rolling Stones, and there was all these rumors that he was spitting on old ladies and vomiting on everybody, and it was just so fascinating to me. And to me, the greatest line any frontman has ever delivered was on that very last show the Sex Pistols ever played in America in January of '78 at Winterland in San Francisco. After all the hype and after all of the, all of the buildup around them, they played a short show. And then at the end, he laughed and he said, "Did you ever get the feeling you've been cheated?"
Huh.
And that just drove it home. That was just like, that is proving just where his intention.
Yeah, just the shit-eating, the eternal shit-eating grin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. People were pissed off,
Yeah.
which made it even more brilliant. And again, taking it forward with Public Image Limited, and I would have to agree, and I see him hanging on the wall right behind me. There's a great quote from Henry Rollins. It says, Public Image Limited was ultimately more interesting than the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
And I would agree to a great extent. I mean, way more experimental, way more.
Well, how many albums did the Sex? I mean, they had 2 albums?
Just the one. Just
the one? Okay, yeah.
They did the soundtrack to Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which was kind of leftovers and pieced together, but it was really just the one.
So Public Image Limited, they exceeded the Sex Pistols as far as recordings, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And those first 3 or 4 records are just groundbreaking.
Right.
I mean, just post-punk classics all the way. But even with PIL, I mean, he pulled some of the similar antics, and he's just fantastic.
Today, I mean, dude's like almost 70 and he's still pissing people off.
Exactly.
So then Strummer was your other one.
Strummer.
Now my 2 cents, because otherwise I could probably just leave the room and let you talk the whole time. No, because you have so much good stuff. But the thing with them is they were cool and they were political, and they were the crossroads of cool and political, and that's what I loved about the class.
Man.
So anyways, that's my 2 cents.
They looked great. They sounded great. They had a lot to say. They were of the people. I mean, I know towards the end when they kind of had the, top 40 hits, people kind of accused them. Well, they got accused of selling out from day one. But anyway, they were the people's band to me. Strummer, just the urgency. To me, no other frontman has ever matched that. It always seemed like he always had a gun to his back, like he had to make his message really, he had to make it clearly and he had to make it quickly, which only intensified the weight and the insistence of his message. He was very spontaneous. He was unpredictable. I mean, he would, they had a set list I think they would follow, but he would go off of it a lot of times. And he was just in his own element on stage. And, to me, he was just, to me, it's my favorite band. So I had to include him.
So far, no one on my top 10 have you mentioned, but Strummer was definitely in my honorable mention.
Oh, cool.
All right.
Okay. So
All right.
we have 2 different perspectives here.
All right.
That's awesome.
So that's category 1.
I narrowed it down to a decade. I went with the 70s.
Okay.
And I have a couple of guys there.
So is this our next stop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 2.
Yes.
All right.
Again, and I've gotten into a lot of arguments about this band, and I know people who grew up with them in a later era maybe don't have the same respect or love for them, but I went with Steven Tyler, Aerosmith.
Okay.
I mean,
like
just his look. I mean, he almost had like this gypsy chic. It was like Janis.
Lots of scarves, nails painted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The scarves, to me, he set the tone for what would come 10 years later with the hair metal. I mean, he was the poster child for frontmen for that.
I have a strange relationship with them because when I became aware of them was when they were kind of getting into Maximum Cheese Factory,
exactly.
With Pump and all these things where they almost became more of a caricature of themselves.
Exactly.
But there was that 70s era where they were very much on the cutting edge of a lot of music and the Boston scene, just a lot of great music around that time. So there's kind of 2 Aerosmiths in my view. And so I think the earlier one had a lot more artistic merit, whereas the kind of later incarnation became more of a kind of like I said, a caricature of themselves. But
Yeah.
definitely. But I appreciate them very much, and I love both versions of them.
Oh,
but,
yeah. No,
Yeah.
me too. And, obviously the times that I've seen them live have been later. I mean, I didn't see them live myself until Permanent Vacation around 87. They still knocked me out.
Oh, Angel's one of my favorite songs. I love playing What It Takes on guitar.
Yeah,
But
those first 5 albums, like especially Rocks,
yeah,
especially Get Your Wings. I mean, those are just, to me, rock and roll classics. And
yeah.
he's just such a show off. And I mean that in a good way.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, that's part of being a frontman,
That's
right?
part of it, and he loves the adulation. And to me, he's a great singer. He's got a lot of soul. I mean,
Dream On, man. He had some notes in that song that your blood just curdles.
Exactly. And on their live album, that live bootleg, it's called, he does a cover of James Brown's Mother Popcorn, which is it's outstanding. So
Yeah.
Steven Tyler, I could not pass him by.
Okay.
Because to me, he was fantastic. Alice Cooper.
So Alice Cooper, so this goes back to the discussion of were they a frontman or were they their own thing? I
Right.
mean, so that's another one that I thought of from the kabuki kind of aspect of what he did. I mean, you can argue that, one of my near and dear loves death metal and all the corpse makeup that everybody wore, that he was the very first to kind of get into that whole part of it. But I didn't put him on because I wasn't sure if he fell into the frontman.
I would say yes and no. I mean, I had a hard time with it. And two, I was like, should I include him? Should I not? The thing with him was, when the band first came up, they were the Alice Cooper was the name of the band.
Sure.
So they were a whole entity, a whole group. But obviously he kind of rose.
What's his real name?
Vincent Fernier.
Okay. Yeah.
But to me, he just kind of, another one, he's a perfect example of what I was talking about with Johnny Rotten. I remember when I was a kid growing up, again, looking through my sister's rock magazines. I mean, the guy was scary. I mean, he scared me, literally.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I mean, he looked like this, he had just rolled out of bed. He looked like he had all this smeared makeup on him. He had snakes on him, bottles of whiskey. It was he just looked like he was from another planet. Right. And I love that now because now that I've gotten older and, I've gotten more into his music and I know more about him, that was kind of it was kind of farce. It was kind of a persona.
Did you see the Supermensch documentary?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he basically just plays golf all day.
Exactly.
I mean, he's like an old white dude, now. But I mean, still, even in today, I think,
He's a born-again Christian.
Yeah.
He's been sober for 30-something years. So it's an act. It's more.
Oh, for sure.
It's more driving the point home that was a persona.
And you almost can't talk about him without talking. I'm blanking on the name of his agent, but that was such a great documentary.
Oh, yeah. Shep Gordon.
Shep Gordon.
Yeah.
And the business side and how he became almost a caretaker and a best friend. I mean, to this day, they're like best friends.
Oh, yeah. So, they're
they're
still an entity. He just had that kind of, the thing about him, talking to him now, and I had the pleasure of interviewing him last year, which was a huge,
I didn't know that.
Huge thrill.
Is it just written or is there?
It was, it got published. It was actually my first cover story in Creative Loafing. It was last fall.
Do you have it somewhere electronically?
Yeah.
Send to me because I'd love to see that.
It just talking to him. It's funny how it was a joke the whole time. I mean, I don't mean that by the music, but that was the whole comedic kind of the tongue-in-cheek type of thing, but people bought it. You know?
For
people
sure.
fell into it and people were so scared of him.
Well, I have this conversation with my buddy, Andrew Domestico. I don't know if you're aware of him.
Uh-uh.
He's a local musician, but he has a couple of different incarnations of his music. One is Achilles, but the other one is Blade of Sur, which is his death metal thing. And so we're always talking about the most pleasant, nicest, sweetest, caring people we know listen to the most crazy, insane, horrible music.
Yeah.
And it's almost, it's this duplicity, but, again, with Alice Cooper, you see him, like you mentioned, it looks like a mental patient.
Totally.
But he's this low-key dude. So I always love that about that sort of thing.
And what's even cooler about him now is that the persona, it's even more effective now that he's older and he's an older guy and he just looks creepier.
Sure.
I don't mean that as a slight against him.
No, for sure. Yeah.
It just adds to the characterization, which 100%. Is brilliant. Finally, I know we talked about him earlier and we were talking about the dual partnership with Jimmy Page, but I mean, I had to go with Robert Plant.
All right. So that's my number 7. All right. So we're into my top 10 now.
Just the command, the power,
the sex,
Oh,
the unbuttoned shirt and the jeans riding low and slithering around on the stage. And
I mean, that's
kind of, just he oozed that, probably one of the first. I mean, maybe Elvis, you could say beforehand, but in a very kind of blatant sexually way, I think Robert Plant just embodied that.
Absolutely. And he had just as many dudes who wanted to be him as he had women who wanted to sleep with him.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, that's not an easy thing to pull off.
He was the blueprint for so many rock and rollers thereafter into the hair metal and all that other stuff. I mean,
and vocally, just
amazing what he did with his voice. I mean, one of the things that I always find interesting about that band is, especially early on, how much they borrowed from, blues musicians and that sort of thing. So that's a strike that they get against them. I don't know how much that was Plant's thing, because I don't think he was writing the music. He was just doing the lyrics along with it.
I never took that as kind of a deal breaker. I mean, I know it sucks that a lot of those musicians probably didn't get the royalties or the money that they were entitled to. I'll agree with that. That is a bummer. But I mean, I never took that to be something that was a setback for
I think that was the nature of the business back then. I mean, you look at Elvis and a lot of the music, he was singing in a quote unquote black voice songs that were written by African Americans who sang them just as well as he did, but they didn't want it coming from that face or that, person.
Exactly.
He was a more, acceptable, vessel for that music to arrive through. But a lot of people, I mean, I've listened to, was it on Rollins thing or I forget who it was, but they play Elvis singing it and then they play the original versions. And then you're like, why was this one okay? It's just very interesting.
I know.
So in any event, but not to get off track, Robert Plant 100% agree with. He was my number 7.
And I don't think Plant or Page would be the type to downplay the fact that they borrowed that stuff.
Oh, for sure.
I think
they saw it as honoring it more than pilfering it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I went on to the topic of metal.
So are we chapter 3?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Chapter 3. No, we're good. So now we're getting into my world, and I'm going to see there's 3 very specific metal vocalists in my top 10. I'm wondering.
Okay.
You had to at least get 2 of the 3.
Okay. My first one was Rob Halford.
Nope.
The metal god.
All right.
I mean, again, just the characterization, the
leather, the spikes, and that gets into that whole world of, he it wasn't originally, but at some point came out as openly gay, but there's a whole kind of biker leather, definitely a part of metal, especially in the late 70s and 80s that he just embodied.
Yeah. And I have to throw this in there. I thought it was just hilarious and laughable that when he did come out, that people were shocked or surprised.
It's like, what?
Have you been paying attention?
Yeah. Well, 100%. Yeah.
I mean, he's a leather daddy, right? Come on. So Halford, to me, the metal god, great vocalist, just great frontman. Next, I went with Bruce Dickinson.
Not on my list, but for sure, Iron Maiden. I'm with you.
I mean, I think he redefined the role of the frontman in that he could hit notes that nobody could
vocally. Who's the Merciful Fate? King Diamond.
King Diamond, yeah.
These operatic metal singers that just kind of can just do.
Yeah.
Their voice is truly as much of an instrument on that stage as any of the other instruments. I think a lot of times singers kind of get a bad rap as not really contributing to the work behind creating a song, but those guys, I mean, as important as any other instrument on the stage with their vocal cords.
And Bruce Dickinson had a hard kind of early on. He had kind of some shoes to fill because,
right. He was not the original singer.
No, they had Paul Di'Anno on the first 2 records, and here he was stepping into a band that was just really starting to catch on and get momentum. And then he jumps in and they do Number of the Beast, and it's like, I mean, come on. I mean, it was a natural. So I think he's brilliant. And then I went with Ian Gillan, mostly for Deep Purple. His contribution.
I love that we do not overlap in this topic at all. All right. Awesome.
To me, just another great vocalist, great frontman, just very animated. And I mean, when he would fling his hair all around, it's just so I love that band, and mostly because of Ian Gillan's vocals.
Very cool. All people I didn't think of, so I love it.
Okay, cool.
All right.
From there, I moved on to the 80s.
Chapter 4.
Yes,
All right.
sir.
Let's talk about it.
So I've got 3 guys here, and I'll talk briefly about them. My first one was Michael Hutchence from NXS.
Okay. Very much kind of an evolution from Robert Plant in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Adding a little bit more shoegazy, moody kind of, and maybe even a more feminine kind of manifestation of that act. But the unbuttoned shirt slithering around on the stage.
The swagger.
For sure.
Sexiness. He was oozing it. He had kind of a quizzical quality. Like he was always kind of up to something in his mind. Seemed like, and he had like that just idle power. I mean, he just had this. I mean, he wasn't, particularly a particularly handsome guy. Some would argue, but he had this kind of charm that just kind of took over.
Also a Jim Morrison. It's almost like taking Jim Morrison and Robert Plant and if they had a child, it was Michael Hutchence.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would agree with that. And I heard something interesting. There's a great Nick Cave documentary.
Oh, God damn.
I know. I didn't mention Nick Cave, but I know.
All right.
He's talking to Kylie Minogue in this documentary. She dated Michael Hutchence for a while. And she said that Michael Hutchence apparently had pretty bad vision. He couldn't really see very far. So
that was part of his.
Well, she said he put on lenses, or I can't remember how she stated it, but he did something to correct his vision so he could see. And she said it scared the hell out of him. So he went back to just not really being able to see. But you would never know that because of the connection. Arguably, maybe the greatest, if not one of the top 3 greatest frontmen I've ever witnessed. To me.
So my wife and I, we got married in 2005, and me being always the music fan, but back before there was iTunes, I burnt our gift to all of the people, and I'll get you a copy of it. I'd appreciate it. But I burnt a CD so everybody that came to the wedding got a CD of songs, and Never Tear Us Apart was one of the songs on there. And to this day, if I hear it, I have to listen to it all the way through to the end. I can't change off of it. I just love that song so much.
It's like an instant classic. Like the first time you heard it, you're like, this is one of the greatest rock songs of all time.
For sure.
Oh, just the string. Oh, it's a great song. Again, maybe not to people what he once was nowadays, but pretty solid following nonetheless. I had to go with Bono. I mean,
I did not. Bono's strong for sure. All right. Well, and go ahead.
I mean, U2 was easily one of my top 3 bands in high school that I listened to. And I mean, the first few times I saw him literally brought tears to my eyes. He was just...
It's a moving music, especially at the peak of their powers. And not only that, but what a run of albums they had.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ. War, Boy, Joshua Tree, Rattle and Hum, Octung Baby.
Yeah.
I'm missing what's the Flame one that I'm forgetting?
Unforgettable Fire.
Yeah, I mean, something like 8 amazing albums in a row. I mean, they kind of became a blurred copy of themselves towards the end of their career. They pissed a lot of people off when they populated everyone's iPhone with an album, and then taking the political thing maybe a little bit too far, but still just great showmen, great songwriters, great musicians, and Bono, definitely.
I mean, he's another one. There's a lot of people who despise him, but to me, that earnestness that he had, it spoke to me. I mean, that was very life affirming. And, I had never really witnessed in that proximity a frontman who, the first time I saw them was in '83 on the War Tour. He probably wasn't a whole lot older than me, maybe 5 or 6 years, but it seemed like a huge gap in terms of years. But I mean, he just made us feel like we were part of something.
And it's weird because it's a different look on the same type of thing Strummer did. Again, it was cool. Again, it was political, but it was in some ways a lot more epic or orchestral or kind of, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but it almost true. You felt like you were at a rally when you're going to
I mean, for me and my friends who were really crazy about him, I mean, and this term gets thrown around a lot, but he was a hero.
Yeah.
He was total hero to us,
I got to go eat at his hotel in Dublin.
Oh, yeah?
And yeah. So, it's funny because I've got a good friend, Dave Sweeney over here, who's from the part of Ireland that my family comes from. And so I always like to talk to him about Irish things and what do people think about Bono over there. But we went, and my wife in 2008 for my birthday got us a trip to St. Patty's to be there in Dublin for St. Patty's Day. And they have a hotel there on the river, and we got to eat there, and very, very cool. Off topic, but anyway.
No, and actually U2's my partner, Dennis's favorite band, so I have to mention that. He's seen them since the first time they ever toured the U.S. He saw them at a little bar, and he's been that's been his favorite band ever since. So
very cool.
Lastly, for the 80s, had to go with David Lee Roth.
David Lee Roth was my number 11.
Okay.
So again, I mean, turn the sex up to 11 and
just part comedian, part singer,
showman, circus, carnival barker,
everything you'd ever want.
Yeah, for sure.
Everything. To me, just the consummate frontman.
Right.
I mean, he's fun to watch. He is, he's a wise guy. He's everything. So,
well, also too, as a late comer to being Jewish, I always talk about my recent catharsis that I'm 10% Jewish. I love the fact of him kind of turning the perceptions of the Jewish as a people on their head. And,
exactly.
I'm gonna put on wrestling shoes, gymnastic pants, doing splits, and just shoving my dick in everybody's face.
Exactly.
I just loved he just kind of turned it on its head. So I
mean, that takes a certain amount of, for lack of balls to do.
Yeah, and he had the spare. For sure.
It came so naturally to him, which
right.
is so honorable, so admirable, I should say.
So is that chapter 3 or chapter 4 of the 80s?
That was 1, 2, 3. That was 4.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
This isn't so much divided by time or place or decade, but I went with 3 guys. I grouped them together because to me they're similar.
Chapter 5 is the catch-all. Got it. All right.
These are the audacious, fearless, unflinching, just balls out.
I'm excited about how little overlap we've had thus far. But here comes
great.
Your catch-all.
I had to go with Iggy Pop.
Number 4
in this one. To me, influenced every frontman who's ever followed him. Every single one.
For sure.
He's the bravest, the boldest frontman ever to me. He really showed that there was no barrier between him and the audience. It's impossible to not watch him. As much as I love the Stooges, as much as I love the stuff he did with David Bowie and with somebody who you really like with Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, I mean, you just can't take your eyes off the guy.
Well, if physicality is a metric by which we judge a front man, I don't think there can be another Iggy Pop.
Never.
You can't, there's no one who's going to be more Iggy Pop than Iggy Pop.
Exactly.
I mean, blood, sweat, leaving it all on the stage. I mean, that's the reason he's ripped to this day without an ounce of fat on him, is he just puts it all out, stage diving, jumping around. I mean, he just doesn't calm down, just all over the map. Crazy. And it's funny because he occupies a very masculine and a very feminine place at the exact same time.
Exactly.
And there's stories you hear. There was a great movie called Velvet Goldmine. I don't know if you ever saw.
Oh, yeah,
there was a lot of insinuation that there was some sort of relationship with Bowie and some other stuff. But at the same time, this guy would throw down in any ball. I mean, just a mighty figure in every way, shape, and form.
Exactly.
So 100% agree.
He had to be tough coming from Michigan.
From Detroit. And there's this weird phenomenon with me on these podcasts where I can be an encyclopedia out in the world and I get on this show and I forget stuff. But what's his real name?
James Osterberg.
James Osterberg. And when you hear an interview, he sounds like a blue-collar factory worker from Detroit.
Totally.
But then he turns on, again, much in the same way of Alice Cooper. He just has this character that he turns on.
Yep.
And it's amazing. He did a great interview with Mark Maron, who's one of my podcast interviews. But Mark talked about how before he walked in the studio, he was out on the deck doing yoga, took his shirt off and came in and sat down and just checked every box that Mark could have ever hoped for.
Uh-huh.
And he doesn't he live in South Florida?
Yeah.
He lives in the Keys or something like that. Okay. Well, anyway.
Yeah. He's
Iggy Pop. I mean, my list is not in order of greatness. It's
no, not at all.
But if there was a number one for me, he might be it. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's
anyway,
huge.
go ahead.
Similar to Iggy, certainly followed in his footsteps. I went with Stiv Bators, Dead Boys, Lords of the New Church.
This is where you occupy a world outside of my knowledge. I'm aware of them, but I didn't. So
he didn't necessarily emulate or imitate Iggy, but he's definitely of that school. Just totally irreverent, ready to take any chance. He almost had the, seeing him, it was almost like, let's see what he's going to do next. I remember when I saw him, and apparently he had done this a lot. He took his mic cable, and he wrapped it around his neck really hard, and he was starting to turn purple. And I got sort of scared. I was like, what is going on? And then just when you were about to like jump in, he unwrapped it. So
I have my version of that, which I've talked to you about before, and I'll wait till mine, but remind me when we talk. Stiv Bators?
Yep.
All right. I have my Stiv Bators. Go
okay.
ahead.
And then last in that category, I went with Lux Interior from the Cramps.
Okay.
Wow. Just as confounding as he was entertaining. If you ever saw him, I mean, the guy was
spooky.
He looked like he just walked off the set of a horror movie, but he would wear like these skin tight leather pants and 6-inch pumps and walk around the stage like that. He would have multiple bottles of wine on the stage, and he would just take them and drink them. And most of it would just run down his chest. He was just so fascinating to watch.
So that there's three names, and one of which I'm forgetting. You're going to have to help me with, but mostly in the 70s, you were watching people that you weren't even sure were human beings.
Correct.
And so obviously Bowie had some stages where you're like, I'm not even sure he's from this world.
Exactly.
Peter Gabriel definitely did that for a period of time. And then with Roxy Music,
Brian Ferry,
but then also who's the producer of the
Brian Eno.
Yeah, they also just were like, I'm not sure they're from this world. So not necessarily the same type of music, but you almost feel like you're catching an alien in the middle of doing something that you weren't meant to see when you're watching these people.
And that's half the fun, is trying to figure that out.
Yeah, like what is going on here?
While the music is just, kind of coming over you and you're being moved by it. So Lux was he was fascinating. So those are my categories. I then have my top 3.
Okay.
So I'll jump into those.
Get it.
So we just talked about him, and I know he could fit into the first category I brought in of people who are more known as their own entity versus being part of a band. But I could not mention David Bowie. I mean,
he's my, if I'm on an island with one person to listen to, it's Bowie. So I hear 100%. But the great thing about him is he's 6 different people.
Totally.
At least. Yeah.
And it's great. He said, in an interview years ago, he said that's how he was kind of able to keep his sanity. That wasn't him you were seeing. That was him playing a character, much like an actor would play a role in a play and then in a TV show and then in a movie. I mean, if you can kind of put yourself into it, but really think that you're playing the role of somebody else, that has to kind of be a little easier than sharing your soul out on that stage every night. So, obviously he's a trendsetter, visually just stunning. He's always evolving, always changing, so engaging.
That death of all of the recent passings of people just really, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, but he put out arguably one of his best albums, which was written while he knew he was dying. Yes. It kind of came out posthumously. And measured up to anything he's done before.
Absolutely.
So he had more to give. That's what killed me, is I feel like he had more to give, like there was more material that was relevant and
absolutely.
And, but I just loved him so much.
Oh, and it's hard for me to listen to that record, to Black Star now.
Oh God. Yeah. Cause it's like he's singing from the grave, or he's telling you, goodbye, for sure.
It's very difficult for me to listen to that record, but I will agree. It's probably one of his best records that he'd done in the last, 20 years.
Yeah,
for sure. We talked about him again, but again, I cannot skip him, is Mick Jagger. I mean, born to be a rock star.
The thing about him is he's confounding to me. Well, first off, you listen to him talk and he sounds like a chimney sweep from Mary Poppins. But then you listen to him sing and he sounds like he's from Muscle Shoals or from, Motown or whatever.
Exactly.
And then one of the most awkward people on stage, but somehow made it. He's a horrible dancer, but at the same time, he almost created his own way of being. I mean, there's that video. I think it's Start Me Up, where they play. You can watch the video without the music, the way he's dancing to it. And you're like, what the fuck is this guy doing? But he just makes it work. I mean, he was his own thing. He created his own lane that he drove in.
And a great thing about him is, I don't know if you feel this way, but a lot of times it's really difficult to make out the words that he's singing.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to make them out. And I remember, as a kid, I'd heard Tumbling Dice off Exile on Main Street. I didn't really know the words. And then when Linda Ronstadt had a hit with it, she put it out as a single. I was like, those are the lyrics. I had no idea what he was saying. But, just the attitude, the strut, the exhibitionism. He was a total extrovert on stage. I mean, he just commands attention. And don't get me wrong, Keith, again, is just
a bad boy.
Exactly. And without Keith, there is no Stones.
And smokes and soul and...
But that was, to me,
I love the fact that he threatened our president with a knife at some point in his history.
But to me, that's the greatest. We talked about this earlier, the greatest dual partnership, and that they're kind of nudging each other for a little bit more of the spotlight. I mean, that's just brilliant. So Keith, I'm a huge fan of, but I got to give it to Mick there. Number one has always been my number one, probably for decades, and I don't see it ever changing, especially since he's left us, but I got to go with Freddie Mercury.
Ooh, how the fuck did I miss Freddie Mercury? Part of the reason is I wrote this list like 10 minutes before you.
Okay. No.
Come on, go ahead.
Freddie is just, to me, he was intrepid, humorous, brave, cheeky, bold, unfettered by criticism. He took a lot of criticism in his day, and especially later on, and I'll talk about that in a moment. He was a rock star. He was a star of the stage. He was dramatic. He was into the whole theater of it. He was like a peacock, displaying his feathers on the stage. And the greatest thing about him, and, towards the end, I will say, I've always been a Queen fan. That's been one of my favorite bands since, God, I can't even tell you how long, but towards the end, people kind of turned their back on him.
The whole AIDS thing really kind of made it.
Well, even a little bit before that, I know a lot of the diehards, like the harder rockers, kind of really wrote them off when the Game came out in 1980 because they heard Another One Bites the Dust and they heard Crazy Little Thing Called Love. And they're like, what are these guys doing? But to me, that was just them expanding on their many talents. And by about 82, they put out a record called Hot Space, which huge topic of controversy. I mean, that was, to every Queen fan I know, longtime Queen fan, that was the jumping off point.
Is that the one with Another One Bites the Dust, or was that?
That was the one before. That was the Game. Hot Space, the only single off of it really that got anywhere was Under Pressure. The duet with Bowie. But it was mostly more of a funk kind of soul.
Well, they started to have, there's that scene in the movie where they're kind of introducing a funk disco bass line into the, almost dance music. And so I know that was divisive for a lot of fans.
And see, it's funny you mentioned that because I refused to watch that movie.
Well,
because I felt like America turned its back on them. And I thought that was so, I had a lot of resentment towards that because on that tour in 82, on Hot Space Tour, that was their last American tour. Attendance was very low, and people who were going to the shows were going mainly to see the opening act, who was Billy Squier, who was huge at that time. And Queen never toured America again. They never had a hit in America again. And, things like MTV banned one of their videos because they were dressed in drag in 1984. I'm like, come on, that's just, ridiculous. You're just jumping on the bandwagon, So then Freddie and Queen have a resurgence in 92 with Wayne's World because of the scene with Bohemian Rhapsody. And I'm thinking, is that what it took? Anyway, that's my own personal feelings. But just for a gay man to be able to command that much attention and have that much adoration is a huge thing. I know Freddie probably for years and years was told he would never amount to anything, that he was, not as good as everybody else. And he took that and he ran with it and he became the greatest. And just to me, the greatest performance in the history of rock and roll.
Well, and arguably the greatest voice of anybody you just listed or anybody that could be listed.
Oh, absolutely.
If you believe in God and God is singing to us through a human vessel, that voice just is as close to perfect and angelic as it comes.
And their performance at Live Aid not only stole.
You got to watch the movie. I hope you soften your position on it. The movie is not a great movie by any stretch. The fact that they were going to do it earlier where Sacha Baron Cohen might have been the person to do it. I like the idea of that because he would have been a little bit more perverse and probably play that side of it a lot more than they did in that movie.
But I think that's what they didn't want.
Well, right. And I see that and I get that. And that's a problem with it. But
sure.
But what that actor did with it was pretty impressive too. I mean, he studied the moves of Freddie and got him down pretty damn good.
No, and that's what everybody has told me. Yeah. People have pleaded with me, like,
Well, far be it for me to push you over the edge, but
one day
at some point,
I'll probably wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to watch it today. But for right now,
keep your expectations low, and as a novelty, it'll be interesting to you.
I just haven't been influenced or I haven't been interested to watch it because it goes a little deeper. It's these feelings I have of, nobody cared about him at the end. And now he's being, viewed as like this long lost hero, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I want people to know the greatness he achieved while he was on this planet. But I don't know.
Well, if you go through visual artists and look at what space they held while they were alive versus when they died,
exactly,
much in the same way.
True.
Hey, who's that crazy guy who cut off his fucking ear? Oh, okay. He might have had some value. He might have put some things out in the world. So
exactly.
So I'm going to go through mine.
Yeah.
No order of importance, and one of them is a little bit dirty pool because there's you'll understand why. So number one is Ozzy.
Okay.
Obviously, a Black Sabbath, near and dear to my heart, is one of the forebears of metal. He had a career that, arguably exceeded, if not in artistic merit, in commercial appeal with his solo career.
Uh-huh.
But you just can't be a metal fan and not bring up Ozzy as, and again, his voice and so for me, Ozzy was a big one.
What is it about a performer that you like the most about him?
Well, he was the Prince of Darkness. And not only that, but I saw him within the past 5 or 6 years over here at the, I forget what it was called then, but the amphitheater.
Yeah.
And he had as much energy as he did in his 20s. He was running around dumping water on himself, but the whole, biting the head off of the bat, just the playing to the, there was that period in the 80s where the covers were, just blood. And this was when Tipper Gore and all these other people were, the censorship was really big, and they had the Suicide Solution was the song that they were saying were driving kids to kill themselves and all this other stuff. And, it's the poking at the social mores of the time.
Definitely.
Tongue in cheek doing so. And again, much in the way you look at Alice Cooper, I mean, he's kind of just this old English dude who just walks around and mumbles to himself. But, he gets on stage and he turns into something else entirely.
Well, and they were villains. I mean, those guys were the villains of rock and roll, which to me, we kind of need. We need that. And I don't see
villains.
I don't see a whole lot of them
anymore. Why? So do you know Rob Sexton? He owns Planet Retro. So I texted him the other night. I keep trying to get him on the show, but he's like, I tend to get myself into trouble when I open my mouth. So I'm not sure I want to come over and get myself in worse trouble, but I love him because he always reminds me of the two dour guys in the balcony on the Muppets. He's just always like, but I love Rob. So anyways, I texted him. I said, what is the current punk rock, or what was punk rock after rap music? And he said, I think rap music was the last punk rock. I don't know that there is dangerous music anymore. I don't know if there are dangerous people in music. It's just kind of become diluted. And I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Good point. No, I would totally agree.
So talking about dangerous frontman, Axl Rose, another one. Guns N' Roses just hit me right as I was going through puberty.
Sure.
And that album, if there's a more perfect album out there than Appetite for Destruction, I don't know of it. And every one of those videos to a young 12, 13-year-old boy watching him up there and talking about slithering around on stage as a snake and just living that LA lifestyle. I mean, I don't know that there was a more perfect version of that than Axl Rose, especially
Undeniable.
during that album.
I saw them when they played here years ago when they opened for Motley Crue right after Appetite had come out. I went to one of those shows. They played 2 nights here. I only went to one. But then me and a group of friends of mine drove up to Michigan to go see them. It was a friend of mine's birthday. And we said, what do you want for your birthday? And she said, I want to go see Guns N' Roses. And they were right in between 2 opening slots. I think they were in the middle of the AC/DC tour and an Iron Maiden tour that they were going to open for. But they had 2 weeks in between where they did a bunch of headlining shows. And we drove up to Michigan, and we saw them in Saginaw and in Detroit. And we got to meet all of them and hang with all of them. It was fantastic. But those 2 shows are probably 2 of the greatest shows I've ever seen.
I saw them in Orlando 3 years ago with their current tour. I never got to see them originally, which is one of my big regrets. But I got to see them, and, they're older. It's somewhat of a cash grab. It's not the original lineup, but still at that, my heart just, overfilled with joy.
Yeah.
Seeing Duff and Slash and, Axl on stage and going, so many great songs in such a short run of albums. I mean, they had a career's worth of amazing music over arguably 3 albums,
Oh, yeah.
So, he's one of my big ones. Next one, this might be, I wouldn't say controversial, but it's kind of straying from the pack a little bit, is Chuck D. Okay. And the reason I went with Chuck D is around 7th or 8th grade, the world of rap was introduced to me. And, you had your Run DMC, which you were kind of getting because of Aerosmith. Mm-hmm. You had LL Cool J, who kind of was doing stuff. A little bit later, NWA was coming around. But for me, Public Enemy just hit me dead center. And his voice was like if James Earl Jones and Morgan Freeman were singing to you, just this authoritative, strong, and I love Spike Lee at a very early age. Uh-huh. I remember as soon as, of course, I'm going to forget the movie now, but Fight the Power song, when that
Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right, thank you. When that came out, I remember as soon as that came out on VHS, I got my parents to let me rent it. And if you remember the beginning of that movie, Rosie Perez dancing for the entirety of that song. And it's just like, this is something is being said here. Something's going on here. And, I always have this kind of white guilt about, taking ownership or liking or whatever about it. It's like, this speaks to me. I'm not sure. I'm not who he's speaking to, but it speaks to me. And I've always loved it. And he's always, from that world of music, been, my favorite.
Well, they were one of the artists, one of the groups that, listening to them, you felt kind of like you were getting an education.
Oh, for sure.
You had to go and
most of my heroes don't appear on any stand, John, I had no idea about John Wayne before he told me about John Wayne. I had no idea about Elvis Presley before he told me about Elvis Presley, So it's kind of like there's an alternate history that you're not being taught, and I'm going to teach it to you whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Yeah. He was certainly one of those guys that would make you reach for that history book and say, let me follow up and see what he's talking about.
For sure.
Which is always a great thing.
For sure. So my next one, which we already talked about, was Iggy Pop. So we'll move on. Here's one that meant a lot to me, but he is definitely not the traditional mold of a frontman, but David Byrne. And so I picked David Byrne because he to me was kind of the beginning of alternative music or independent music or artsy. He wasn't by no means sexual. He's, I think, admittedly on the spectrum of, as far as psychologically speaking, but almost like a professor, almost like a art is, not an Andy Warhol type of character, but there's just something very peculiar and odd. But the songs were so well written and very kind of academic. I don't know. What's your feelings on David?
That's
Byrne?
a great choice, and I feel bad I didn't.
Well, good. I'm glad I went up to you in one category.
Yeah, that's an excellent choice. The great thing about David Byrne is if you look at him, he looks like he's the accountant who's going to be in the back of the stage counting up the.
You would never say this guy is a let alone a front man, a musician.
Not at all. But then when he gets up there, he just becomes somebody else, and that's part of what's what transfixes you is like, how did that guy who looks that way command so much attention? And I'm sure you've seen the concert film Stop Making Sense,
which is
one of the greatest. Yeah. But just the way it starts to where it ends, that transformation, that sums up,
embodies him in many ways.
David Byrne.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I have never arrived at a conclusion whether he knows how weird he is. Like, is he doing it on purpose or is he that way? Like, sometimes I think he's putting this on, and other times I'm like, no, he's just a weird dude. I can't figure out which one it is.
But if you figured him out quickly, you'd lose interest.
If this is 100% true.
That's what keeps you kind of engaged.
So my next one may be somewhat divisive in nature, mostly because who he's become in his dotage is not someone I agree with a lot politically in a lot of ways. But as a person of Irish heritage and someone who likes Oscar Wilde and someone who likes kind of these effeminate singers or whatever is Morrissey.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously the Smiths, so much great music, and his writing is just absolutely amazing. My wife can't stand him. Anytime I have him singing in a car, she's like, will he pick a note and sing it? Like, I don't know what, but I just love him. And, in later years, it's like 50-50 when you buy a ticket, if he's actually going to have the show or not. And then any show that you go to, I saw him over at, what's the one over in St. Pete? Mahaffey. And everybody goes and buys a drink during Meet His Murder because they don't want to watch the movie that he's playing in the background. But, a great performer, a great showman, a agitator, very willing to kind of get in anybody's face and challenge them politically, intellectually, whatever the case may be. And so, anyways.
And again, almost an anti-hero. To look at him, you would never guess that he would front what's now probably the most revered and arguably the most important band of the 80s.
Yeah.
Looking at him. But when he went on stage, again, he became somebody else. I love the Smiths. Don't get me wrong. I will admit my affection. My affection is strictly for Johnny Marr.
Yeah,
Johnny Marr is my rock hero. That guy is
just an amazing guitarist. He's just a longevity of career. And
he's
idolized by all the people that we idolize, or at least I idolize.
And he's such a humble guy.
Oh, for sure. There's
humble.
Another one of these duos.
Totally. So, and I'm not going to lie. I mean, I listen to the Smiths all the time. I love every one of those records equally. But yeah, I would agree. Morrissey was a fantastic frontman.
We talked about Robert Plant. My next one, and again, musically, people either like this band or they don't, but Anthony Kiedis, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, yeah.
Red Hot Chili Peppers, for me, even to this day, people kind of give them a bad rap. They're white boy rap or white boys trying to do funk or whatever. And not the best singer in the world, not the best rapper in the world.
That's
but
okay.
He definitely kind of took James Brown and Iggy Pop and molded them into his own thing. And Blood Sugar Sex Magic to this day is one of my top 5 albums. That just can't, they did something with that album. Before that, early on, they were kind of what they were criticized as being. I think with when Hillel Slovak died and Mother's Milk came out, they started to go a little bit more artistic. That's when John Frusciante came on, one of my favorite guitarists in this world. But with Blood Sugar Sex Magic, they held up in that mansion, and Rick Rubin was on it, and they were at the height of their powers. And that is just such an amazing album to me. And to this day, my goal when I think I may just set down a guitar and never play again is if I can learn the end of Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And it's not technically the hardest thing to play in the world on a guitar. Do you know the song I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's like an end 4 minutes that's just Frusciante and this kind of spiral guitar chord progression, and for something, and there's even a part in the song where you can hear it's raining and cars driving through the rain. And something about that is so haunting and beautiful to me. That is the golden ring for me on guitars. But in any event,
that's a great album.
Not talking about the guitarist, Anthony Kiedis for me.
Yeah.
I mean, such a meaningful band, such a meaningful person.
Oh yeah, I'll agree with that. He's very very exciting and fun to watch.
So then my number 9, musically, maybe not the most merit, although he's an amazing guitar hero in his own right because of how he plays the guitar. But if you are a metal fan, I don't think you can't have James Hetfield on your list.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I grew up in the age of thrash, and Metallica were always the tip of the spear in the thrash world. You had Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer, but I just, for me, the most perfect 3-album run of any band in the world between Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, I think Ride the Lightning. Am I getting those backwards? I think it's Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and then Injustice for All.
Yeah.
His voice kind of changed over their career. They kind of went off on a vacation with some of their poppier records, and in their later days have become touring monsters and have tried to go back and grab their earlier glory. And, they had their Napster feuds. And in a weird way, that duo, much kind of in the way of the Eagles, is not the singer and the guitarist, but the singer and the drummer,
Oh yeah.
So
Lars.
kind of a weird dynamic there. But so that's my number 9.
It's funny you mentioned them, and going back to something I said, I remember they did a great cover of Queen's Stone Cold Crazy. And I remember when that came out, I had so many people, I said, oh, that's a Queen song.
Yeah.
People would not believe me.
Yeah.
Because they were more accustomed to hearing the more kind of, pop, smooth, kind of soul-based version of Queen. I'm like, no, I assure you that's a Queen song. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, as much as they get shit these days, everybody wants to shit on them. I mean, if metal, I don't think you can argue the brilliance of those albums, and Kill 'Em All as well.
Oh, undeniable.
So,
I mean,
so my number 10 is kind of a weird one. I'm ending kind of on a soft note. I wasn't building up to some great catharsis. I do have about 5 or 6 others that I just want to throw in before we wrap up. But my number 10 was Robert Smith.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I had him was you made a post on Facebook the other day, and I don't remember exactly what the parameters were, but it was something to the effect of a perfect album, start to finish. Do you remember what the post was that I'm referring to?
Gosh.
It was something about the album having to hear the songs in the order in which they appear.
Oh, right. That was one my friend Kevin brought up.
Yeah.
He said, he had texted me and he said, I was riding my bike and I had a mix on and I heard one of the songs from Exile on Main Street.
Right.
And I had to stop it because I can't hear a song out of context from the whole. And I said, that's a great question. And that's what, and I said, what's an album that you have to hear?
So Disintegration, that album for me has a lot, is evocative of a lot of memories. And much of it has to do with my wife, because we would go over and study for just hours and hours on end in the library. And we kind of had these, for some reason, I had the Elliott Smith mural on the side of my building.
Yeah.
Elliott Smith was the soundtrack, and Sufjan Stevens was the soundtrack to a lot of studying between my wife and I, because it was pleasant.
Yeah.
It didn't get in the way of what you were doing, but it was, there. But for whatever reason, when we got back to my wife's dorm room, Fascination would come on, Disintegration would come on. And that album just reminds me of the courtship of my wife.
Oh, wow.
And such a great album, start to finish. And who is there another Cure? I mean, I don't think there is. There's not another band that kind of occupies that space for me. And, you take, again, kind of this sexually unclear front man, you take the makeup, but very much shoegazy, very much kind of emotional. And he wasn't running around the stage doing a bunch of gymnastics. He was kind of more, a recluse on stage.
Yeah.
He was more kind of, you almost felt like you were intervening on something with him.
Exactly.
So that was my number 10.
Great guitarist.
Yeah.
Never gets enough credit.
Yeah.
And one thing that kind of pisses me off about The Cure, because I love The Cure, later they became popular and they were on MTV and Friday I'm in Love and whatever. But people tend to take that and let it cloud their vision of the earlier stuff. When I think of great post-punk albums and bands, I always put The Cure on there and I get so much criticism. What do you mean The Cure? I mean, listen to Faith, listen to 17 Seconds. Those are fantastic albums. I would put them up there with anything by Joy Division, anything by Gang of Four. I mean, those are up there for me. So The Cure is a band that I think people love, people are fanatical about, but there's so many people who dismiss them. And I think that that's so unfair.
Yeah. So I'm gonna turn this the epilogue, because we've had our chapters and then we went through mine. I'm calling this an epilogue to kind of create space from the rest of the list, because they're just meaningful to me. And if you have any ones that you want to add in, but when I talked about Dirty Pool, one of my favorite frontmen, and again, my wife's not a big fan, but is Stevie Nicks. And so talking about Stevie Nicks in the realm of frontman, she was just, we talked about Gypsy with, who was Steven Tyler. Was she very much occupied that world too? Oh yeah. I mean, they kept, the two of them kept the scarf business, in the black for many, many years. And her voice and just all of the soap opera of Fleetwood Mac and just what was going on between all the people in that band. But I don't think there is a sexier, more attractive frontman than Stevie Nicks and singing Rhiannon in the 70s.
She's amazing.
So, I just have always just held her in such high regard.
See, I was going to go there, but I thought...
So this is where I cheated, I
thought maybe we'll do a female version.
Well, maybe we can, but so that's where I was saying.
I agree.
Cool. Yeah.
She's fascinating.
So a couple other ones, and again, the duo frontman, and they get a bad rap, but the Gallagher brothers, Liam Gallagher, just the snottiness, the soccer hooligan kind of just, he would just, I'm not singing tonight, or I'm going to go sit up in the rafters and watch my brother try and get through and sing these songs. And, the microphone above his head angled down, and the parkas, and just his hands behind his back, and just, he had that Johnny Rotten kind of way about him. He's just an interesting character. So that one for me is a big one.
I remember with Oasis, before I heard them, I read about them, and there was so much hype about them in the British press. And I was just not ready for the hype. And I remember, this is not long after I had started at the record store, we would get promos all the time, free CDs and stuff to, play in the store. And one of the coolest promos we ever got, and I still have it, was a vinyl pressing of Definitely Maybe.
Oh, wow.
A British pressing, which now goes for a ton of money.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give these guys a chance. What have I got to lose? I hadn't heard them yet.
Yeah.
I just read about them. So I took it home and I put the needle on the first song on Rock and Roll Star. Mm-hmm. And within the first, I'd say 15 seconds, I was like, I love this band.
Yeah.
There was just something so immediate about that sound, that guitar.
And they kind of got into later albums, they get a lot of heat for being too much the Beatles, and you can go both ways on that, but
big deal.
Amazing songwriters, right? And just, Noel Gallagher can write amazing riffs, amazing music. And as we've seen in his later career with High Flying Birds and, some songs with Oasis, he's a great frontman in and of his own doing, but
he is. I agree.
They are. I hate to call them a guilty pleasure, because I think they have integrity in their music. But if I'm wanting to just drink a beer and have fun, I can put them on for hours and just be happy with every song that comes out of the speaker. So that was one. Another one, and this has been. I never liked them as much at the time, but I'm liking them more now. And it's funny because these two guys, I'm gonna talk about two guys at once.
Okay.
But is Maynard Keenan from Tool, and then Zach De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine.
Uh-huh.
They both came out kind of in that Lollapalooza period, but Maynard is just so perverse and kind of bizarre, much in the way that, Lux Interior, or Peter Gabriel, he comes on stage dressed like a woman or in riot gear or in carnival gear. And then De La Roca is just such an agitator and very much, in the vein of Clash and kind of political music and political rock. So I really appreciated them. Any comments there?
Oh, no, I would agree with both of them. Those are both pretty powerful, awe-inspiring guys for sure.
And so I didn't get to touch on the American punk, nor did you really.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's the Ramones. So there's definitely a lead man there that we should talk about. But for me, if I had to pick one, it's Henry Rollins. That hardcore scene is so meaningful to me. You have Ian MacKaye from Minor Threat and Fugazi, and then obviously Henry Rollins before his solo career with Black Flag. And a lot of people say that Henry's their least favorite Black Flag singer, which
I hear that a lot too.
I think that's just bullshit. I think that's that going against the popular guy. Like he obviously he's the most well-known of them. So I just think you kind of set yourself apart as knowing more if
exactly,
whomever, Keith Morris or any of these other people were your favorite. But so the one I didn't have on my list but I'd like to end on, because as I get older and more into music, I become more and more fascinated with this person, is Nick Cave.
Oh yeah.
And he is just an interesting character between his early career and what he's become lately. It was the Birthday Party was his original band, which is very much a punk band. And now he has kind of manifested into this, I don't even know what you would call him.
Balladeer,
but he's just murder ballads, just dark, crazy music. And he's a screenwriter and writes soundtracks and, just an interesting character. But again, I always have trouble with picking someone whose name is in the title of the band as a front.
Right.
So,
No, I understand.
With the Bad Seeds, he's kind of his own thing there.
Sure.
But,
his career, his body of work is stellar.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on what mood you're in, you can put on, a Grinder Man album, a Nick Cave record, or a Birthday Party record, like you said, and it'll fulfill that mood you're in. Great writer, just very literate. So yeah, I'm a huge Nick Cave fan.
Well, good. So that's our Frontman episode. Any closing remarks?
No, I mean, I feel bad that I left out talking about America, talk about Paul Westerberg and Bob Mould.
Yeah.
Two Minneapolis guys who fronted two of my all-time favorite bands. Can't leave them out, but no, I think we did a good cross-section.
I think it's pretty amazing that we got through without Kurt Cobain, Eddie Vedder, or Chris Cornell coming up, because grunge and a frontman, very commercially popular.
Sure.
But again, I think there could be conversations about those guys as
I agree. And I love all three of those guys, not to leave them out. But yeah, there were, like I said, there were so many more I could have
for sure
thrown in there. But
that's the great thing about these conversations, is we could do the show 5 times and have different people. So
great.
Well, as always, I appreciate you. As soon as you leave, I'm going to think about what my next project is. So I love doing this on Facebook. I love if you're a Facebook friend of mine, I love getting people pissed off at each other politically. But another version of that for me is kind of sending you down a path musically. So I appreciate it.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Gabe, for coming by. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.